there is now a brand new way you will be able to get some free ILV tokens, and it's from this coming up competition. Everyone who gets selected is going to get a mega disc, and only 16 people are going to be selected. Basically, you will need to build an Illuvium team in the team builder that is currently available, and then 16 of those teams will be selected, and players from the core contributors will play those teams and those strategies and try and win it all. The winner, the person who has the winning team will get 5 ILV. Second place will get 4, third will get 3, and 4th to 8th places will all get 1 ILV, and everyone will get a mega disc. This is actually going to be absolutely awesome. You would just click on this link to access the team builder, and on this link to submit your strategy and everything via the Google form. Now, what do we need to know about? We need to know about this scoring system. Creativity, 2 points. Strategy, 3 points. Very, very simple. Have a creative team and have a strategic team, or have one or the other, okay? Focus on one or the other, that is fine, but you're gonna wanna make sure you include some of this sort of stuff. I'm not gonna reveal the team I'm planning on submitting, but I am going to submit one. But I am going to talk about what it might take to build a really great strategic team, some of the really core concepts we're going to go over. But first, before we do that, let's jump into actually how do we get to the team builder. Once you go to the homepage, Illuvium.io, you hit on the little games thing and you hit Illuvium Arena, which did not work. So first we will maybe make sure to hit play now. I always forget this. And even if you have beta access or whatever, hit register for Illuvium beta. It will already know you're signed in and everything. Otherwise it will ask you to log in. Once you are signed in, you go to Illuvium Arena up the top here. You can see right there. And then you go to team builder. Once you're in there, you can see all your teams, create a team and all the rest of it. You will only be able to build 5 of your own custom teams inside this team builder. Illuvium Master is coming up with their own team builder soon, so you'll be able to build as many as you want in there. So do not worry. Now, build 5 in here, and let's go over some of the key strategies. What strategies am I going to talk about today? Firstly, how to balance the roles of your Illuvials effectively. This is rule number 1, in my opinion, when it comes to Illuvium, especially for team building. Rule number 2 is have at least 2 strategies ready to play. If the first strategy fails, you are going to need to pivot. That is going to become a large part of Illuvium PvP. The third thing is to have a mixture of affinities. I've been told by some people playing the game that the hyper mechanic is actually very used here. It wasn't used so much in survival mode, but that Titanal, like we've seen in Private Beta 1, when he gets that Earth Affinity hyper set off and he gets the Bulwark hyper, he's pretty much unkillable. So you're going to want to make sure you have a diverse set of affinities so that you do not fall into that trap. Fourth, we have diverse roles for the Ranger. Do not sleep on the Ranger. She is free, or he or she is free to change weapons on. They are free to move around the board, and they are well, those are the 2 main things. They're free to do whatever you want with them, so they can change roles very quickly and very efficiently compared to Illuvials. The last basic strategy I have for you is that augments how to kind of pick them and how to have them benefit your strategy. But until I start using them, it's going to be a little bit hard to give advice on them, so I apologize for that in advance. The 2 advanced strategies I'm going to cover at the end of this video are, firstly, the points per round. This is very advanced. You don't always have to do it, but it's really helpful, especially when you have like 10 90 cost Illuvials. You start to realize very quickly that that is not going to work. Okay, so we're going to cover that off. And the second advanced strategy is to have a counter to your opponent's counter. To have a counter. And that's what I'm going to call it for the rest of the video, because I think that's really silly and I love that sort of stuff. Have a counter, and I'll explain that at the end of the video. Let's jump back into it. Let's go in and create a team. I'm going to make it really brief. I'm going to call it test, and then I'll go over a team I have already built, and we'll go into a bit more detail on that. But the first thing we need to think about is a balance of roles. A really easy way to do that is to go into your filters. Once you select the Illuvials, you have much more advanced filters. You can click them. You can filter by affinity, class, mastery, tier, and all the rest of it. Now, the class doesn't necessarily completely define the role of the Illuvial, but it does a really damn good job. So what you actually really want to do is you want to look at the 5 basic classes, which are not particularly clear here, but they are Bulwark, Empath, Fighter, Scion, and Rogue. All right. Rogues jump to the back line and they're kind of assassins. Scions are mages. Fighters are physical attackers that aren't too tanky, but not too bad. Bulwarks are tanks, and empaths are healers. I'm not saying you need to have one of everything. That actually might be quite a bad strategy. But you need a mixture of alluvials that can heal, alluvials that can deal damage, and alluvials that can provide adamant support. From affinities, you have air, fire, water, earth, and nature. Nature is for healing, fire deals damage, air is a much more support role. Water is also quite supportive, a little bit healy. And earth is very defensive. So what I might start off with is I might click earth, or I might click bulwark, and I will look for some really tanky units. So earth isn't necessarily a good one to click. Most of these are tanky in here, but for example, Tatapi is a mage. It's not going to do a whole lot of tanking for your team. So maybe searching for bulwarks is going to be a bit easier for us to follow. So if we unclick earth and we jump back in and we go to bulwark, what we can see here is all of the really solid tanks. Now, bulwark does have its own affinity. I don't think it's going to show us here, but basically it provides damage resistance for your entire team when you fulfill the synergy. So you might want to look at some of these units. For example, Goliant costs 70 and has really great defenses, and you might want to add that to your deck. You can see that it's cost 70 and that's your total cost there. We'll cover some more of that sort of stuff later, but let's cover off roles first. Next, after we've got our first bulwark, we might want to go and find a fighter. They'll stand just behind the bulwark and they'll go and attack later on in the battle. If we add Mjol, he's pretty good for a cheap unit. And then we'll go and we'll maybe make sure we grab a healer. If we grab an empath, we can look around. Archie is really great for frontline tanks. Adorito is great for the entire team and things like that. So as you start to learn what the different alluvials do, you will come to understand all these different strategies and how they come into play. But I think with my thing is so heavy on the front line, I might go with Archie. And now what we have is our entire team is very centralized, but the problem is that they're almost too diverse in affinities. I talk about having at least 2 strategies and having a mixture of affinities. So let's start to go into that. My first strategy is a fighter at the front, covered off by a tank, and there's a healer helping them out in the battle. But what if I want a completely different strategy, okay? With this one in particular, a strong set of mages is probably going to knock it out very quickly. So what I want to do is I want to make sure I can take out those mages as a part of my strategy or as a complete alternate. And what would be good for that are rogues. Some of my favorite rogues are actually the Volantes, which are the T0 rogues. They will be free when you play the Illuvium overworld when the open beta comes out. And now what we can really start to consider is matching up some of these synergies. I already have an air, which is actually pretty decent offensively, especially on rogues, because rogues are already great at dodging. You can add the Exalted Air Volante, which helps add to that second strategy, or you might want to add a second rogue. If we take a look, I might want to double down on this whole air strategy and add something like a Rota, which is a second rogue. So I'm really building out that secondary strategy while also filling out these affinities. If you click this little button right here, let's zoom into it. Right there. If you click that little button, you can see all the affinities you currently have. With 3 air, you get 10 dodge chance for your entire team and 20 dodge chance for air units. Energy cost is increased by 40% on your enemy unit's first Omega. So this is very powerful, and Omegas are the weakness of your tanks, okay? Tanks are great against all sorts of attacks, but Omegas are where they fall short. This is kind of like an ultimate ability. So what the air is really doing is it's not only providing a second strategy against mages that are going to crust you, but if you have them all on the board with the tanks, they're also going to support them in that way. So finding really complementing strategies is going to be important here. Now, what we need is a mixture of affinities. I don't have the affinity chart up right now. I might be able to bring it up. Let me just grab this really quickly. Hopefully, is it here? There we go. Here is the affinity chart. Let's take a really quick look at this. Water is 2 times effective against earth, 2 times against fire, then nature, then air, and then back to water. And they're 1 times effective against the second one. So water beats fire, which beats air, which beats earth, which beats nature, which is back to beating water. Now, this is very complicated. Take a screenshot, pause it here, try and get it through your head. What we really need to understand is currently our deck is comprising mostly of air, and we need something that really complements that. What you really don't want to have is something right next to it. If I had nature as my complement, for example, then fire would destroy both my nature and my air, and I would just lose to fire. Having 3 is also good too, but they're kind of hard to build with the deck limits we have in place. If you had water and nature, then you would get destroyed by water and air, you would get destroyed by nature. And you see kind of how the cycle repeats itself. So what we really want to do is we want to build this deck around earth or fire as a secondary. We've already got the bulwark going as our primary strategy, so we might double down on earth. If I get rid of this rogue class and grab an earth affinity instead, we might not want to add a Scarabok because they both won't provide bulwark since they're part of the same evolutionary line. If you're unsure, they just look pretty similar, so I think it's not that hard to discern it. But if you're unsure, you might want to jump on like a Illuvium Master or something to double check, or ask someone in the Discord. So what we might actually want is we might want to continue building up fighters as a part of that strategy, but since they're earth, we'll be able to build up that second affinity at the same time. In this case, I think the Relentless Terror Lynx is really good. My deck's already not too expensive right now, so we're going to go with that. The other thing is to have diverse roles for the Ranger. And although we should have maybe more alluvials, personally, I like to have about 12, 13 alluvials, 3 to 4 weapons suits, and then the rest is augments. So the augments are about half of the deck, a little bit less. The alluvials are about half, a little bit less. And then the weapons and suits are in the middle. So what we next want to look at is for some weapons. What I really want to do is make sure it really fills those roles that I don't currently have, or boosts my roles that I do have. What's a really clear thing is if I can give it an earth, not necessarily earth. So if I can give it earth and bulwark, then that's really good. I'm not going to go into too many advanced concepts. Weapons do have a lot to do with bonding with your ranger. You will find that out a bit more when you play the game. I don't want to overwhelm this video with really complex strategy. It's more the basics for beginners and for some intermediates as well. Just making sure you really get a grasp of what's important before you move on to that other really complicated stuff. So we might want an earth bulwark shield so that our ranger can support on the front lines. The shield is one of the best weapons in my opinion. I like to fill out the areas of mastery I don't already have. So I need that middle range, 35 to 40. I might actually chuck a 40 shield on it, which is going to be really sweet. And then the other thing I want to do is double down on a completely different strategy. Currently, I only have one healer, but I can make, if I see that my Goliath, for example, is coming this close to defeating my opponent at the very start of the battle, I need a healer in my team. Okay, and I've only got Archie. I can maybe add more alluvials that heal, but there are a lot of slots in the deck, and my ranger isn't doing very much. What I could do is I could grab a nature staff. Let's grab a really cheap one so it's easy to pivot into. I could grab a nature staff, and maybe I could even go into the suits and get a cheap suit that will grant me a mega power like this one. Grab a cheap suit that grants me a mega power. I grab the nature staff. Now, not only am I getting up those nature affinities, but the staff is empath and actually grants a shield to a lot of your allies once it casts. So this allows me to switch up my ranger from tanky at the front line, or maybe they've got a lot of tanks themselves, so that's not particularly helpful. And so I turn it into a healer to try and outlast their tanks. And the ranger can fill all those roles. After that, we go into the augments and we just try and find ones that benefit their strategy. Currently, since it's a bit overwhelming and it's hard to understand what they all do off the bat, I'm just going through, I'm reading them one by one. The 3 in a line will all do the same thing, just to varying degrees of strength. You'll go through to one of these. For example, I'll find this and this will gain 8 physical attack damage or gain 4 crit chance. Not particularly helpful for my team. Enemy team gains 40% less healing, or enemy team gains 20% less energy. This benefits really well for my air synergy. If I give this alongside my air synergy, now their first Omega is going to take, since it's 60% less, more than twice as long for them to cast, and thus keeping my tanks and everything alive for a lot longer. So I'll also need to decide kind of how much of this I need, but I feel like getting multiple of these is great. So I'll grab that one and the second one, which will have a slightly lesser effect. You'll see this Exalted Charge Capacitor, which grants shield or energy to the alluvial that it's equipped to. Helpful, but not that good for my team. When they crit, gain 8 energy attack damage and gain 4 crit amp. I think this is really good because your rogue units, when they're paired up in a synergy, as we can read right here, our rogues right here, when they're paired up, you get 10% crit chance and 8% crit amp, and 25% and 20 for rogue units. So when I have 3 of them, I'm getting 25% more crit chance. So this right here is highly beneficial. It gains 4 crit amp or gain 8 energy attack damage. So every time it crits, I'm going to get 8 more energy attack damage. That's going to stack until the end of the round. So that's really helpful for my rogues. And then I'll look through them all and I'll build up my team like that. So I'll just save that one quickly and we'll take a look at my other team, which is right here. So here is my Steam deck. I'm going to show you this so I can kind of go through my strategy a little bit. The big thing that I did build this thing around is clear synergies. I know a lot of people like really building up big synergies, stuff like 7 water and 7 nature, but I like to have heavy diversification. You can see I've got 4 here. I've got fire and water combining to make steam. I've got more water and I've got nature, and I've also got granite, which is earth. So I've got 4 different affinities. It's going to be very hard to gain hyper up against me. I've also got my invoker and slayer, which is mage and physical, kind of separated. And I've got my bulwark, which is going to grant energy and physical resist to my entire team. I felt like my mage and my casters, they needed that extra bulk to be able to survive longer. What I'm missing a little bit is healers, but I have a couple. They're mostly tanks on my team though, so they're not really going to be doing a whole lot of healing in this case. So you can see how I've diversified my different team strategy. You also want to diversify the types of synergies. For example, my Fisto is Invoker, and so is my Sea Forest. So I don't want to have that there. Okay. So these are both Invoker. You can see they have the same little symbol in the bottom there, the little circle, all the dashes around it. They have the same symbol. But what you will notice is a Fisto costs 100 mastery points, as you can see in the top left, and Sea Forest costs 55. Why is this important? It means it's a lot easier to get both of these units onto the board and match them up together because they're not costing too much between themselves. And then Sea Forest is granite, so it can provide a little bit of tank in the back line, and Fisto just deals heavy damage all around. So they're a very good supportive core together, and you want to look for 2 alluvials, 2 or 3 alluvials that match up really well as their own little unit. Build a few of them in your team and a few that have cross-pollination, and that is how you build a really great team for Illuvium PvP. You can also see with my augments, I've got some really great ones. This one here grants Omnivamp. For anyone that doesn't know, Omnivamp gives you healing on your Omega damage. So for my Invoker, which is heavily into mages and casting Omegas, very helpful. My Quantum Nullifier, enemies in a medium area have their physical resist reduced by 24%, or their energy resist removed by 24%. Sorry, I thought that was on the screen. And what that helps with is I can give that to some of my tanks and reduce the energy resist of my opponents, making my Omegas deal even more damage. Now, the advanced tactics that we need to talk about. Firstly, the points per round. I'm only going to talk about the first 3 rounds because they're the most important. You just gain so much after that that it doesn't really matter that much. For round 1, you gain 100 mastery points. Round 2 is 100, and round 3 is 120. Why I'm saying this is because you want to make sure you can either kick off with a really great round 1 or double down with a really great round 2. You don't necessarily need to win both or either, but making sure you have something set up for those rounds is going to give you some good momentum to try and finish off your opponent in round 6 or 7, assuming it's quite an even game. So in my case, I have quite a few cheap tanks in my deck because I feel like they work really well together. And when I can build out for 100 cost, I can throw greater nature Grocco, which is 35, and lesser water Volante, which is 25, and they make up 60. And then I can chuck on either of my 40 costs to build out that first 3 alluvial core without with spending all of my 100 mastery points. But at 200, it gets a bit more interesting. At 200, I can try and get in one of my big pieces at the back, or I can get something like Rake in alongside a cost 30 or 35, like Caribou or Grocco. and that's where I can build out that other 100. So getting your things to match up to 100 is going to be surprisingly effective. I hope it's useful. It's kind of hard to say. But then 120 is even more interesting, where you compare out something like a 70 and a 50, but there's no 20 cost. So the 100 mastery units are a little bit harder to play in that way. And you might actually need to play them round 2 alongside 3 other alluvials. And that's where my head's at. The other things are you can get your weapons and suits to really match in with this. Okay, for example, I've got Caribou, which is probably going to come out early very often. I think it's very good. It has thorns and everything, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it's crazy. Caribou comes out really early, and so that's cost 30. What works well with that? Another tank. So my Heady or Cling are both cost 40. That brings us up to 70. So what I want to make sure to do is hopefully get a weapon that's 30 to fill that out, or an armor that's 30 to fill that out. And why is a weapon or armor really good on round 1? Because it doesn't hinder you for round 2. I actually think you want to get your weapons and armors on as soon as you can, because you can remove them for free and add alluvials to the board if you need. Because alluvials are a lot harder to pivot. So getting those weapons and armors to fill into that 100 cost is going to be one of the best uses for those strategies. The other thing is a counter to their counter. I cannot stress this enough. In this case, I have a lot of big invokers. They're already pretty good against my opponent's backline, but they're mostly used against the front line. So what I have is a really big rogue in my Umbre, and my Slayer Core with Gyro can now go back and take out their mages while my mages are taking out everything else. Because if their mages are able to take out mine, or if they add rogues, I'm going to be a little bit of trouble. The other thing is if they add a lot of rogues to try and take out my mages in Ophisto, Seaforest, and Dualef, I need a strategy to protect them well. That's very, very important. And so their counter to me is rogues. And so now I need to counter. I need to add a Goliant, or one of my other 4 Bulwarks, or my Bulwark Ranger, or a bunch of my augments that make my targets invulnerable when they drop to 50% health. I've got like 7 or 8 things in this deck that stop them from countering my invokers. I cannot stress that enough. 30% of my deck is made up of different ways to protect my invokers from getting knocked out, because they are my main source of damage. They are the main part of my entire strategy, and I want to make sure to preserve that. So I hope you guys learned something. I hope you're all going to submit something for the competition and try and win that 5 ILV, Mega Disc, whatever it is you're after, and just see the core contributors play with your team to try and win an internal tournament. That excites me the most out of this entire thing. I hope you guys enjoy it. Have a good day. I almost forgot to mention, do not forget to register for the Illuvium Inferno competition. You do not want to miss out on this. Currently, there's $2,000 in prizes. Who knows? Some people might want to add more to that and it might go up. We don't know that yet. A big thank you to Arcade for sponsoring this. I'm very excited to host this with Jimbo and Ben. It is going to be such a fun stream, such a fun time, and participants have a chance for the ultimate glory. You could be the first ever winner of an Illuvium PvP tournament. No one else will be able to say that. It'll be grassroots. It won't be an official Illuvium PvP tournament, but it'll go down in history in the Illuvium history books. You can see here there's currently 173 people registered. There's only 80 slots left. We're having a soft cap of 256. If it hits that, join the waiting list. There might be slots open up if people don't show up. So don't forget to do that, but go and register now. Registrations close in like a week. Go and register for the Illuvium Inferno. Cannot stress that enough.